What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? Today, we will try to answer that question in 20 minutes or less. I'm Ella Sagar.
And I'm Jack Benjamin.
We're reporters for The Media Leader, and this week we'll be covering the latest news about the UK general election, M&A, the fate of the Evening Standard, and a pair of conferences from the Ad Association and the IAB that we attended this past week. So Jack, it continues to be a busy pre-election period. What would you say is the most important news story of the past week in media?
Yeah, it is a very busy pre-election period. We're trying to do a good amount of coverage around that. And one of the biggest stories that I reported on in the past week was the amount of estimated ad spend that's been put on hold from HM government during this period between when the election was called and then through to around September period. So sort of like right after the election, because ad spend would not immediately come
It's not
through
like
in July.
The new government comes in and immediately
Exactly.
is like, yeah, we're going to start spending on campaigns here and then this channel and that channel.
Exactly. So I spoke with some folks at Wavemaker, which handles around 80% of the government's planning. And they estimated that about £50 million worth of ad spend has basically been put on hold during this summer period. Wow. And it's not 100% clear if any of that can be used. The rule, generally speaking, is that you're not really allowed to advertise if you're the government during the pre-election period. But there are perhaps some campaigns that they haven't been told that they definitely need to bin. That would be maybe perceived as apolitical campaigns that could maybe go through, but they were still, as of the reporting that I did on this, they were still sort of working through if everything entirely.
What category each thing goes on, because there'll be multiple across many different categories, channels that have been running for various periods of time, and that must be quite complicated as an agency to start trying to pull that all back and figure out what's the next step.
Well, it's been a complicated year because you know the election is coming, but unlike in my home country, you don't have a specific set date, so you kind of have a little bit of guesswork being done. So I don't know if you recall earlier this year when there were rumors that Rishi Sunak was going to call an election in May, which would have meant that there would have been a rush to try and get more of ad campaigns pushed up into the spring period. So Wavemaker, I was told, did some work around that just in case. And then when that election didn't get called, they were like, okay, there's probably not going to be an election until the autumn. It seemed like everyone was kind of on the same page in the entire industry, thinking it's not going to be an election until the autumn. So when the summer election got called, everyone was taken off guard. And what had previously been done is, assuming there was going to be an autumn election, all that spend from later in the year that wouldn't otherwise normally go was like pushed up into the summer period, because surely there won't be an election called for the summer. And then all that spend is now being put on hold. So it's just been a bit of chaotic, it sounds like.
I think that kind of thinking around, it will be an autumn election, that makes the most sense, and that's what everyone was expecting does. And then the kind of ripple effects of when these things the timelines get changed is really interesting. And obviously it might affect maybe more like certain media channels more than others, and it affects the forecasting for the rest of the year. If you're kind of thinking, all right, well in Q3 we know that this is going to be coming in, and
if you read the full article on our website, we did look at it in terms of, that's just an estimate of the spend that has been going to different channels recently from the government, and so which ones might be most affected. Lots of really interesting things to think about, and of course it's who knows with the next government and how they're going to advertise. Historically, Labour has apparently spent more on communications than the Tories, but of course we don't know who's going to win the election come July.
We shall see. And obviously the first ITV debate happened this week. BBC, the first debates will be kicking off this Friday as well. So
that's right.
And again, so a lot of media activity around this, and it's being dubbed the TikTok election. Labour and the Conservatives have now got TikTok accounts. Reform has got the most TikTok followers, in case you're interested. But
great.
Yeah, they have had an account longer, to be fair, but just a lot for us to be looking at in future, and we will be talking about the overnights or the viewing figures for the ITV debate later on.
Yeah, lots to flag and keep an eye on, certainly on our part. Another story from the past week that I did think was also worth a mention as a pretty important story was that global media advisory MediaSense acquired PwC's UK marketing and media owner business. Omar, our editor-in-chief, covered that for us. And, I thought it was pretty interesting why PwC decided to sell. I don't know, Elle, if you had any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think from what Omar found out and has written was that it's kind of that media is not big enough for PwC, so it's a scale thing. PwC is like a £5 billion UK operation, so that it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, for MediaSense, I think it's a huge get. Sam and his team do pretty exceptional work. That study's been extremely well received and very important for the industry. And that whole team is moving over to MediaSense, so it's I'm sure great value add for them. It is interesting. There's lots of other consultancies that we've sort of kept an eye on that have exited perhaps the UK market. Accenture shuttered its media auditing arm in 2020. It does hold a programmatic arm through its agency group, Interactive. Deloitte has Deloitte Digital, which focuses primarily on digital creative, I believe. And KPMG also does have a tech, media, and advisory service. But it seems like to me it's clear that a lot of the focus tends to be more in the sort of tech, ad tech area. So that seems like what consultancies perhaps are most interested in, whereas the rest of media, maybe just not worth the trouble.
Yeah, it might be the innovation piece and the kind of that in terms of investment and the kind of the risk and benefit. If there is a business that is transforming itself, and digital transformation is quite a hot topic and keyword when you're kind of looking at this at media, and it's like which parts of media are accelerating the most on that journey. And I only imagine like the AI must be coming up in those conversations as well, and their capabilities there. And then on the other side of things, you were writing this week about indie agency Total Media that has merged with MediaPlus, which is a European independent media agency. These are obviously two completely separate kind of deals and agreements. Yeah. But it maybe, I don't know what you think why these moves are kind of important. Why would Total Media become part of MediaPlus?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've actually just interviewed Guy Sellers and Tom Laranjo, and that interview will be coming out shortly after the release of this episode. So be on the lookout for that. I wanted to ask about why this type of merger. They've been working with MediaPlus, which is it's a German-based indie agency since basically Brexit happened, and they were looking to get a little bit more international anyway, and Brexit kind of gave them a little kick in the behind to say, we really should be looking at partnerships outside of the UK market. So this is in some ways a long time coming to have a formal merger, given that they've been working together in a formal partnership for 7 years. And part of what is so interesting is that if you're an indie and you want to go after more global clients, which many clients, to be fair, are globally interested today compared to maybe what they were decades ago. You do probably there needs to be some level of consolidation or merger to partner with different groups outside of the country. And another interesting part, of course, is that, as mentioned, this is sort of a post-Brexit story, that UK agencies in particular, if they wanted to go after those international clients, like this is the type of behavior that you would probably need to have seen. So lots of interesting things going on there. Total Media does. They like to pride themselves on their behavioral focus, which they say, maybe other agencies talk a bigger talk on, but maybe don't follow through as much. And that really is their focus of looking at like how is advertising impacting consumer behavior. So they definitely have some interesting, unique selling points, and they're trying to just go after bigger clients, and that requires some
bigger footprint, and I think just a bit more just staffing and expertise across different verticals that you might find difficult otherwise. And I think it's interesting. It started as a partnership, and this is a distinct thing. But the independent partnering with BuzzFeed, for example, and that being a kind of the BuzzFeed wanting to kind of cement a foothold in the UK and wanting to partner with a publisher brand. So I think there's lots of different iterations of, it's not a merger and acquisition, but it's kind of partnerships, strategic alliances that to try and get involved in different markets makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, different companies want a piece of the UK pie, and UK companies increasingly want pieces of everywhere else in the world if they can have it. So nothing particularly new or surprising in that sense, but it's definitely interesting to see how that plays out now that we're many years after leaving the EU.
Speaking of publishing, the Evening Standard has gone to a weekly print publication now, which is something that you covered for us, Jack, as our publishing specialist. And so obviously this is down from a daily release. When you were looking into this, what caused such a shift?
Yeah, so Chairman Paul Kanarek reportedly told the staff last week that the financial sustainability of the paper had been harmed substantially by a sort of trifecta of challenges, one being shorter commuting weeks post-pandemic. We're all doing that. Improved Wi-Fi along commuting routes, and therefore increased competition for people's attention during the commute from other media channels. You know, I'm sure people often see on the tube, people downloaded and watched an entire Netflix episode. I've seen Breaking Bad on the tube. I don't know how many times, which is cool and fun that people can do that, but eats into.
Yeah, that's better than Game of Thrones, to be fair. It gets a bit much.
Oh, well, we can have a good debate on that. But yeah, so I think it's a tough one. You know, the standard's been around for 200 years. It survived the Industrial Revolution, the Digital Revolution, and now it's sort of come into this disrepair. It wasn't in particularly great financial shape before the pandemic either. Sort of either barely profitable or losing money since it was purchased for like £1 by Lebedev in like 2009, 2010. So they are pivoting to an online-centric model, but it's also a really tough time
for digital publishing.
For digital publishing. So we'll keep an eye on it for sure to see how it's doing. But it had relaunched its digital proposition going back to the autumn of last year. So definitely that's part of the strategy going forward. And The Independent has generally done pretty well. It's a sister publication, also owned by Lebedev. So hopefully I think they're going to try and recreate the success, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah. But it's definitely a tough story to report on for such an important and historically important paper.
And it's the Independent being like a digital sort of first or digital only paper. Maybe there's learnings to be shared across both of those. And
The Independent's generally been profitable since going online only. And so there, I'm sure, are learnings to be shared. That said, as mentioned, you know, it's a tough time. The profits at The Independent they declined last year that they reported them. So we don't have the most up-to-date figures on that yet because they haven't reported their latest earnings in a little while, but something to keep an eye on. I've written extensively about all the issues facing digital publishing, so do please read those on our website, those articles on our website. Apart from all that news, we both attended industry conferences this week. Ella, you were at the IAB Engage conference yesterday. What were some of the key presentations that were given, and what were your key takeaways?
Yeah, so IAB has done a bit of a rebrand this year with its own cheerleader called Joy, who is a bear who wants to reintroduce the joy of digital advertising.
Oh, right, okay.
And so the most of the sessions were worked around, you know, the joy of the weird, the joy of creativity, the joy of collaboration. And I think that was quite an interesting way to pivot what can be quite an industry conference based on facts and figures and graphs and jargon. And I say this as someone who goes to a lot of events. So I think that was just quite an interesting way to reframe it. All of the sessions are about 10 minutes each. And so I think a session that I wrote up today, which you can check out on the Media Leader website, was from Jeff DeBerker and Lindsay Jordan, who are Essence MediaCom strategy heads. And their presentation was why brands should embrace being weird more. And I think that's quite an interesting one because it kind of, for me, ties in with brands being brave enough to maybe get something wrong and maybe do something that is a bit outside of what their communications would normally look like.
But going for humor often.
And going for humor. Yeah. And one of the examples that they talked about was like the Labour Party's TikTok with the meme of Cilla Black. And so I think there was lots of different takeaways how advertising needs to be more creative. Digital advertising needs to get back to like how innovative and creative it can be, because it seems to have kind of it's got a bit lost into the clicks and that sort of realm, and that it needs to be exciting again. And that was the general feel from the event. And you were at an advertising association conference, I believe, on the same
it's a
day.
breakfast briefing on some new research from Credos, the think tank that they work with at the Ad Association, about the state of public trust in advertising. And there were a few core takeaways. This research had been previewed at the PPA Festival earlier this spring. But one of the main takeaways is that about 30% of Brits say they trust the ad industry, which
I was going to say that's not very much, but nearly a third.
It's not. And it has been growing in reaction to the ASA campaign that was run last year, which helped tell the public that actually advertising is regulated. And we've seen some green shoots of trust since then. So it used to be that the advertising industry was the least trusted industry in the country. Historically, this is going back like a decade. And so this is the first year where that is no longer the case. It's great news. The ad industry is now more trusted than the government and media. So
great. Congrats to us.
Yeah. No, there's obviously lots more work to be done there, but I think something that was really interesting was to look at it by age demographic. So trust among younger people in advertising is perhaps surprisingly but much more significantly up compared to older demographics. And that's especially true of the more nascent digital channels. So seeing advertising on digital or with influencers is trusted much more among younger people than older people. Some of that you would expect, some of that maybe was a little surprising to me. So it's definitely interesting to see, will that trust remain high among that cohort for years and years to come? Or is it something that as you get older, you maybe become a little bit more skeptical or distrusting? So it'll be something that Credos will be keeping an eye on, and the AA will be keeping an eye on. The next time they'll do a report like this is in 2025.
Oh, okay. So we'll stay tuned until
we'll check in then
next year. Yeah. And coming to the end of the podcast now, but there are a number of additional stories this week that we won't be able to discuss in as much detail. So Jack, can you fill us in what else people should be aware of?
Yes. In broadcast TV news, the first televised political debate, as we mentioned earlier, on ITV garnered an average of 3.73 million viewers across ITV1 and ITV1 HD. Combined share of viewing was 31.2%. In outdoor news, Ocean Outdoor has appointed Stephen Joseph, its Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer, to succeed Tim Bleakley as Group CEO effective the 1st of January 2025. Also, the latest Outsmart figures, that UK out-of-home reached 292 million total in reported revenue in Q1, marking 16.4% growth in overall revenues compared to Q1 2023. In publishing news, the Washington Post has hired 2 new editors to replace the outgoing Sally Busby, former Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief Matt Murray, and former Telegraph Media Group deputy editor Robert Winnett have joined, and the Washington Post is restructuring its newsroom to be more future-facing. In social media news, X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, has tweaked its rules to formally allow quote-unquote consensually produced adult content, including AI-generated adult content. And in streaming news, Netflix has announced plans to launch 4 new games based on hit unscripted shows. Netflix Stories Perfect Match, Too Hot to Handle 3, The Ultimatum Choices, and Netflix Stories Selling Sunset.
Thanks so much, Jack. I think that's all we have time for, but until next time, thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to the Media Leader podcast. If you like what you hear, guess what? You can read our stuff at our website, themedialeader.co.uk, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter in the UK of analysis, opinion and commentary about what's going on in media and advertising. You can also find us on YouTube. We are posting video interviews and clips from our live events. And don't forget to check out our LinkedIn page, which is often a very interesting way to see what people in the industry are saying about our articles and the issues we write about. Anyway, get back to work. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.